Hi-Fi Rush released with no hype surrounding it, and everyone immediately started talking about how amazing it was, myself included. People praised the art style, the gameplay, the music, but one thing that did get a fair amount of criticism was the game's writing. A lot of people, including myself, felt that a lot of the game's writing felt a bit cliched and above all else, not funny. Now humor tends to be a difficult thing to objectively critique, so I'll just show you this clip.
If I'm getting this right... First, music player in my chest. Pretty sure that's not supposed to be there. Second, it's powering up my new robot arm. Third, it's making everything sync up with the beat. And... this sounds ridiculous, but when the music kicks in, it feels like I'm on a stage.
And I found this interesting because there's one game that I love a lot that reminds me a lot of Hi-Fi Rush, God Hand. God Hand was also a game that released out of nowhere, had incredible combat, and arguably bad writing. But what I wanted to talk about today was how these games handle their writing and the different ways it's done. Both of these games have a prominent sense of humor. While Hi-Fi Rush's humor feels more character-driven, God Hand's humor feels like there were two devs in the office, and one said, "Hey, wouldn't this be funny?" And the other guy went, "Yeah." All of God Hand's humor feels like it was thought up on the spot, hence why spanking your enemies is a move you will be doing a lot when you play God Hand. The game's director said that for God Hand, he just wanted to do what he wanted for once, not caring whether it'd perform well or not. And you can tell, the gameplay is strange, the engine is reused from Okami to clunky results, and the writing is so stupid.
Help! Sick 'em! Help! Help! Help!
You don't get the feeling that the people writing this game wanted to create a memorable and engaging story. You get the feeling that they wanted to have fun. Unlike in Hi-Fi Rush, where it genuinely feels like the person writing it wanted to create something special. A good example of this would be the opening cutscenes for both games and what they tell us about the game's worlds. God Hand shows us that Gene is an idiot, Olivia thinks he's an idiot, and he's about to beat up some people. It also shows that we're in an Old West wasteland, which is thrown out immediately only a few levels in. We don't even get to see the main villain until about 20 minutes in. The best thing about this opening is how quick it is. It's only 39 seconds, which brings us not only into gameplay, but combat within a minute of starting a new game. So, what does Hi-Fi Rush tell us about its world and its opening cutscene? Well, it tells us that Chai is a well-meaning idiot with the dream of becoming a rock star. We see a robot receptionist showing us that this game's world is at least somewhat sci-fi. We then change from in-engine to a gorgeous-looking hand-drawn cutscene, unlike the in-engine mocap of God Hand. We see a focus on advanced technology shown through Kale Vandelay's speech, which is a major plot point throughout the entire game. We have also been shown that Vandelay Technology is a massive corporation, which also introduces us to the main villain, along with us seeing that he has a plan of some kind. This opening cutscene is 4 minutes and 8 seconds long. This shows that the game sees its story as something important that should be given time so the player knows what's happening, unlike God Hand, which would much rather get you into the gameplay as soon as possible. Gameplay is important, but a player isn't going to have a lot of fun with a game if they don't know how to play. Some may say that a game needs to teach the player how to play the game, a belief that God Hand completely flies in the face of. God Hand's tutorial is near non-existent. To illustrate this, Hi-Fi Rush tells you that you can go to a shop to buy new skills, it tells you that you can purchase overdrive skills, it also tells you that you can purchase upgrades to your health and overdrive meter, and it tells you that new abilities will unlock as you progress through the game. God Hand has all of these things and never tells you. You just finish the first stage and then there's an all-caps shop option that brings you to a shop where you just figure it out. The closest thing God Hand has to a tutorial are these little exclamation marks you walk up to, press circle, and then they say, yeah, do this by doing this. You're welcome, and then it's done. Is this a bad tutorial? Maybe. Now, of course I love this game, and I've played through the whole thing twice, and I think a lot of people would agree with me in calling the game not hard, but mildly inaccessible. The game expects you to figure out most stuff on your own. The game never stops to tell you what's happening and how everything works. Compare this to Hi-Fi Rush, which has two forms of tutorial. First is whenever you do something, or are about to do something, the game shoots some text on screen, and then you press a button and it's gone. Quick, simple, and although effective, could be done more fluently. The second kind of tutorial this game has is actually quite similar to God Hand's, Smidge. Like the exclamation point tutorials in God Hand, he is a stationary thing that when interacted with, gives you tutorials for how to do things in the game. But unlike God Hand's tutorial, Smidge is a character. He talks, he moves, he has traits, and even has his own story arc, with Chai and Smidge's relationship growing as the game goes on. The game wants its tutorials with Smidge to be as enjoyable as the gameplay and writing. Smidge has character. Chai talks about how Smidge acts, and whenever Smidge teaches you a new move, you get to test it on him, and upon doing it successfully, he gives you a reward. This game gives you the option of talking to Smidge to learn more about the game, but whenever you do, it's as fun an experience as the rest of the game's story. And like most stories, both of these games have a protagonist, and these protagonists have one very big similarity and one very big difference. Chai is an idiot, while Jean is an idiot and a jerk. Chai constantly gets himself into conflicts because of his stupidity, and a good amount of the story and levels happen because of him screwing up. This is great, because whenever he screws up, he has to fight his way out, and as someone who had just purchased and is currently playing an action game, you'd want to be fighting enemies as much as possible. And while Jean is also stupid, he's also a lot less endearing than Chai since he's so horrible to everyone around him.
Are you listening?
Have fun. Got nothing to do with me. The only bitch that needs training is you.
I've got a killer ham! I've got a killer hand! You're gonna get it! You're gonna get it! Quit imitating me!
This is dumb. You again? You know, stalkers aren't very popular with the ladies. And looking at you, you need all the help you can get. Bald and you...
These scenes are alright, but they don't make Jean a very likable character. Also doesn't help that these cutscenes have way less bearing on the storyline, with the story of God Hand just kind of happening. Go to location, beat up dudes, go to next location, beat up more dudes, repeat until end. The game's story doesn't really deviate from that, while Chai's actions constantly affect where he goes in Hi-Fi Rush's story. Now at their cores, these are both action games, so it should be expected that some of the game's personality could be shown through gameplay. Because showing a game's humor through gameplay, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to go about it. Because 1, it's a form of comedy that only video games can do, and 2, it's way less likely to become annoying when repeated over time, because after a while, it'd just become another mechanic rather than a hilarious joke. And honestly, Hi-Fi Rush doesn't have a lot of this. The first ones that come to mind for me are the 808 Supers and Hollow Chai, which are clever and show the game's personality well, but still only 3 moves. Now compare this to God Hand, which has moves like the Ball Buster and a Chihuahua racing minigame. Even if you don't find these funny, this game is filled to the brim with comedic gameplay, whether it be the fact that there's a move called the Granny Smacker, or just the enemies that look wacky and stupid. And the reason I think Hi-Fi Rush doesn't have as much stuff like this is because, as I said earlier, it genuinely feels like it wants to tell a memorable story that you can take more seriously. The target audience for these games are not very different in the gameplay department. These games are aimed at Japanese action game fans, and I'd say they both succeed with flying colors, but story-wise, I'd argue the target audience for both is very different. Hi-Fi Rush feels like an early 2000s cartoon a la Ben 10 or the Transformers animated series, which is what I watched when I was a kid. Because of this, although I was typically unimpressed by a lot of the game's writing, there was a somewhat nostalgic quality to it. Now God Hand is completely different. Most of the game's humor feels like stupid jokes that were thought up on the spot, inside jokes, or references to other games at Capcom. I mean, one of the boss themes is called Devil May Sly. Devil May Sly. And the Chihuahuas in the betting minigame reference the game's developer, the other games they've developed, and a very famous quote from the game's director. I might honestly say that the game doesn't really have a specific target audience with its writing. It's not really made with anyone in mind, it's just kind of a stream of consciousness by the people who made it. I mean, this is a game that the director said would be lucky to sell 100,000 units in Japan alone. God Hand was a game that exists solely because the director wanted it to. He felt that he'd done enough for Capcom, and wanted to just make something for himself inspired by the games he adored. And although the game did poorly, he felt that there was value in making a game unlike anything he'd done before, a belief that would lead to him producing Hi-Fi Rush. A game with a studio behind it that before then had only done 2 horror games and an open world shooter. Hi-Fi Rush was a dream game, a game that a piece of New Blood had wanted to make for years and was finally given the chance to. There was no precedent for rhythm action games, and especially no precedent for a fun cartoony game at a company like Bethesda, and yet it was near universally acclaimed because it was a genuinely good game with passionate people behind it. Even if the writing was somewhat cliche in my eyes, it was a game that had fantastic combat and you could clearly tell was made by people who were passionate about what they were doing. And in the AAA space, that's absolutely something worth celebrating.